report and hold a discussion and provide staff direction on the fiscal year 2026-2027 annual program of services and capital improvement program. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor and Council and guests. This is follow-up from our kind of kickoff budget meeting that we had in July, and I know we talked about several things at that time. Tonight, Leanne is going to kind of walk through several slides with you and talk to you about where we landed in terms of appraised value, what items we're still looking to cut out of this budget as the council directed. We've got a few tax rate scenarios in here to discuss with you based on that July discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leanne and let her walk through this, and I'll be chiming in as we go through it.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So it's at this time that we always try to work on the budget and make sure that we're meeting the council priorities. And then we also sit and talk about those areas that we focused on in funding within the budget. And unfortunately, due to the some financial constraints and revenues within the budget, we weren't really able to add a whole lot to the budget. So balancing probably was the biggest priority that we had. But we were able to incorporate some long-term planning for our capital projects. Now, our budget process didn't start tonight or yesterday. We started back in March with the directors putting together their budgets. The city manager holds budget meetings with all our directors in May. And then in June and July is when I work on putting together the budget and waiting for the information from the appraisal district to actually calculate our tax rate. We're in the August timeframe, so we are holding some workshops. This is the first of 3 workshops that we will hold to discuss the budget. And then in September, we will have the public hearings to comply with our truth and taxation policies that are set by the legislature. And also in September, we will adopt the budget and the tax rate. And then the fiscal year will begin on October 1st with the budget and the revenues and so forth that the council have adopted. So in total, our consolidated budget is $63.3 million. Now, this does include our general fund, which is the largest fund of these at $29.8 million, and this comprises about 47.1% of the budget. This includes the funding for your public safety, parks, your core operations such as streets and so forth. Public Works is our second fund, or our water wastewater fund, and that's at $20.2 million and 32% of the fund of the budget, and that supports your city water and wastewater systems. That is followed by our debt service fund at $6.4 million, and that's 10.1. So this is the portion of the tax rate that funds our capital improvement projects. So all of that investment into your long-term infrastructure such as streets, roads, and general fund facilities. Next, we have our restricted funds at $5.6 million, and that's about 8.9% of your budget. Your restricted funds are individual funds that are either legally or contractually obligated to have separated. So those are items that the council has created funds by ordinance or funds that have been set by the legislature. And then finally, we have our stormwater fund. It's a final operating fund at $1.2 million, and that is dedicated to our drainage and drainage system maintenance. As far as staffing, we did not make any changes to the staffing. We have 205.75 full-time equivalent positions through all our funds. General fund comprises the majority of employees at 167, which is about 81% of all total positions. And of that, a little over 59%, almost 60% is dedicated to police and fire. This year, again, due to funding constraints, we have frozen some positions within the budget. The police lieutenant is frozen for the entire year, and this is the second year that we will freeze that position. The multimedia specialist and the code compliance officer, those are frozen in this budget for 6 months out of the year, and this is the second year that we have frozen those 2 positions as well. Utility fund, we have 32 employees. Again, no changes. Stormwater, we have 5 employees, and then economic development, we have 1, and then our crossing guards are in our call safety program fund. The biggest expenditure to any of our budget this year was in wages and benefits. And so for compensation, we did include a 3% progression in the STEP plan for your public safety, which is police and fire. We also included a 3% average cost of living for your general pay plan and your public works folks. That was a total of about $527,000 that was spread across your general fund and your water wastewater fund. As far as insurance, we had a pretty high loss ratio this year at 132%, which means our health insurance was actually losing money on our premiums. When the renewal came in, it was at 32.9%, and Guadalupe did a great job in working with our consultants, and they were able to negotiate that down to 19%. So that actually equated to about a $626,000 increase to our budget. Now, there were some plan changes that were made for the high deductible plan in the past. The employee coverage has been at zero. That was changed to $26 per month. However, that could be waived with the health assessment so that we could, monitor it and do some early detection on any health concerns. Everything else stayed the same. We still contribute 69% to dependent care, and we contribute $1,000 to the health savings account contribution for each employee that is on our health plan. But one thing, in order to offset some of the costs that we were receiving to the health plan, because for an employee impact, it's going to be anywhere from $26 to $237 a month additional that they're going to be paying for health insurance due to this increase. We were able to put into the budget for your consideration a one-time contribution to the health savings account of $1,000. So we have the $1,000 that we do normally. So this will put an additional $1,000 in to help them move towards their deductible. And again, this is just a one-time contribution. It is not going to be ongoing in future years, but this was to offset those increases, significant increases the employees are going to be receiving this next year. Now, Guadalupe is here, and so if you have any particular questions or have any additional comments on this, she's here and is happy to answer any questions that you may have.
And she'll be presenting tonight for those items on the agenda.
All right. And one thing that we always just try to notice is inform the council on is on our enterprise lease program. So we have 77 vehicles. We've been doing this, I believe, I think I started in 2017, 2018. And our total lease for this next year is $607,000. We will be replacing 11 vehicles. So those are vehicles that are currently in our lease program, and they're just up after the 5 years to be replaced. But due to some of the budget constraints, again, we do not have any growth vehicles included in the budget. There were several that were presented as a need from the departments, but it was just not the year to actually grow our fleet. One of the upsides to our program is that we are able to sell some of these vehicles when we replace them at a significant increase over what we normally did just doing trade-ins at the dealerships. And so since we started this program, we have received pretty close to about $1 million in gain on sale. We've cycled 94 vehicles through the program, and that's been about an average gain about $10,000 per vehicle. So it's been a very good for us. And so what we do is with those gain on sale, we use that money and we put it back into lowering the lease so that we can try to keep those costs down. One of the nice benefits of this program is that by having newer fleet, we have been able to lower our maintenance and then lower the amount of money that we're spending on fuel, because the vehicles that we're buying are more fuel efficient than having a 20-year vehicle in our fleet. So now moving into just our financial overview of our budget and property tax. So our certified value grew at 3.9%, and that was ended up at $3.9 billion. Of that, changes to your existing value were about 94% of the roll, and our new improvement was at 5.37%. So we actually had about $209 million of new value added to the budget. And as you can see in that last slide, it is significantly higher than we've had in the last few years. And so that's all attributable to the work that Melissa and her staff is doing in economic development and planning. So that has helped a lot in adding some value to our rolls. When we look at the tax rate, we have, the city manager has presented a tax increase of almost 3 cents, so 2.8 cents. 2 of those is to the general fund. 8 cents, the 0.08, almost a penny, is to your debt or your capital improvement program. So that would bring your tax rate to 56603. Your average home value dropped to $420,000, so that was a 3% decrease in value. And as we talked during our budget priority workshop, that across Denton County, most of the values were decreasing significantly this year. That's not to say that some of your taxpayers didn't have an increase in their values, because I'm sure some did, but just collectively, the average did decrease by 3%. And looking at your average home value and applying the proposed tax rate, then the average home tax bill would actually increase by $50 to $2,380. Again, that's assuming that they had an average home value of about $420,000.
Can I ask a question on that? So are we saying that existing home values went down, right, across countywide, but how also, because we've added a number of houses over the last annum, so how did that impact? Are they lower cost as well, bringing that total average down, or?
So what the appraisal district said is that there's so many houses on the market that it's actually driving the value of the homes, down. And so it's a very competitive market, and that's what's pretty much caused the decrease in your existing homes. And so that would be also to your new homes as well. Did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
So looking at our tax rate, again, we've got a proposed tax rate of 56603. Now, tonight, we will need to get some council direction as to what is the highest possible tax rate that the council wants to consider. And so on the 20th, we will place an item on the agenda to actually vote on what that tax rate will be. Now, we will not be voting on the tax rate on the 20th. We will be voting on the published tax rate. And so when we actually adopt the tax rate in September, the council cannot adopt a tax rate higher than what we've published. So I'll go through what some of the calculations were, and then at the end of tonight, after we've gone through the presentation, we'll circle back to this so that the council can have some discussion as to where you'd like to set that published rate. So with the truth in taxation, we actually have to calculate several tax rates. One of them is called the no new revenue tax rate. And so basically, this is the tax rate that would produce the same amount of taxes if applied to the same properties taxed in both years. And so that new revenue rate is 54290. So that would mean if you didn't have any increases, that would be the rate that we would set. If you adopt a tax rate below that no new revenue rate, then no election is required, and the council can approve it and move on without having any citizen input. The second rate that we calculate is called the de minimis tax rate. And this is applied when you impose an amount of taxes equal to $500,000 over 3.5%. So basically, for cities that are for the smaller cities, you can actually increase your property taxes revenue by $500,000, and that would be a tax rate of 0.56900. Now, if you adopt a tax rate that is below the de minimis and above a voter approval rate, which we'll go over in a minute, then that can trigger, if the residents sign a petition, that could trigger an election. So you always want to be sure that when you adopt your rate, it is below at least the voter approval rate. When we look at the voter approval rate, this is the maximum rate that is allowed by law without voter approval. And so when we did the calculations, that rate is at 56753. So the proposed tax rate that the city manager has proposed is below that voter approval rate and both below the de minimis tax rate. If you were to adopt a tax rate that is above a voter approval, then that triggers an automatic election. So we would have to go to an election before you can adopt that rate. However, there is a fourth tax that we calculate with the legislature has imposed, and that is called an adjusted voter approval. And so within there is a unused tax increment rate that we calculate. So basically, for every penny, when you adopt the rates that you adopt below that voter approval, you get to bank it for 3 years, and you get to use it in subsequent years if you so choose to. So because of the senior tax freeze last year, we had a very high rate, and so we banked 8 cents on that unused increment rate. So now our adjusted voter approval is 64979. So legally, you can go up to that 64979 without triggering an election. And so one thing that I do want to point out to the council is those 8 cents that we banked last year from having such a high voter approval with the senior tax freeze, this is year one. After 2 more years, you're going to lose those 8 cents. So if you do have a need to increase taxes, you will need to do those within those next 3 years, because after that, your adjusted voter approval is actually going to go down, because you're not going to have that big swing like we did because of all the revenue loss that we had with the over 65 exemption. Is there any questions?
May I ask a question on, probably more of a general question on how that's calculated? The way that I hear you explaining that is when the state makes us go through the calculations, and then we have a senior tax freeze that's voted on and passed. Through the state's math, that's calculated to 8.2 cents on our tax rate. So that should be the calculated impact on our tax rate over those 3 years, give or take? Is that
Yes.
how that works?
Correct. So what happened was they come in and they say, this is the tax rate you need to, using your tax rolls to calculate your rate. When we lost that value because of the over 65, the state gives you the opportunity to recoup that, because it's saying, okay, now to be able to generate the same amount of revenues that you did in prior year, you can increase your taxes by 8 cents to get there. And so technically, yes, you are correct. There is that swing. I actually think it was more close to 10 cents, and we increased the taxes last year by 2, so we've already used some of it. But yes, it is giving you an opportunity, and you don't just have 1 year to do it. Once the tax freeze is implemented, you have 3 years afterwards to, to kind of help get your revenues back in line from the loss of your revenues.
So for our numbers, had we, that very first year, increased taxes by 10 cents, that would have just offset for those next 3 years
Correct.
as if the
Correct.
senior tax freeze never happened?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Leanne, I have a question. I'm sorry. If for some reason the state legislature changes that to 55, does that 3 years start over once? Are you gonna have another opportunity? We'll have, okay.
Because what will happen is now you're gonna have a big chunk of value that's gonna come off the roll.
Right.
Right.
So
they're
anytime
gonna
that
say-
happens,
yeah. So they're gonna
it
come
does
back
this.
to say, this is how much you need to be able to recoup the same amount of revenues that you had last year. Again, assuming they don't change how you do your truth in
Sure.
taxation calculations.
Sure.
If they realize that's how the calculations work, they probably would take it out just like they do everything else. But currently, yes, you would have that opportunity.
Okay.
And the de minimis rate, which obviously plays a role in this, there's talk every legislative session about getting rid of that. That came about when they reduced what old people like myself call the rollback rate, the voter approval rate. When they reduced that from 8% to the 3.5%, kind of as a compromise at that time, the legislature offered the de minimis rate for cities in a certain population category. But it's come up every year since then that we need to go ahead and get rid of that. So I suspect it'll come up in this session again. Don't know if it has yet, but it seems like it does every year, or every session.
Right now, it's being, so right now, they're having preliminary interim hearings, and then we'll have some more September 1st through the 3rd. And they are recommending dropping that from 3.5% to 1.5%. And another thing that, I just sat through a TML workshop this morning. Another thing that could severely impact is they are talking about changing how we do, or how the appraisal district does appraisals. And so right now, you do appraisals annually, and the appraisal districts are capped to a 10% increase, to increase your value by 10%. So they are looking at potentially having it where you only do appraisals every 5 years, and you have a cap of 3%. So basically, your your values would be flat over that time period, and so would the amount of, because your increases would be capped at 3%.
So just sort of getting back to this 8 cents or whatever. So essentially, the legislature understands that any time an exemption is given to one group of people, that shifts the tax burden to basically everybody else. And so they give us this space to play with to try to recoup that. Is that sort of the big picture?
Yes, I honestly, I think if the legislature knew how the calculations work, they'd probably take it away. But in essence, how the calculations are, it does allow municipalities to have that flexibility. When you have a big change in values, or which exemptions does affect your values.
Ultimately, it's about shifting that burden to other
Correct.
taxpayers.
Correct, yes.
We just think we were really surprised last year, as y'all recall, on how that works, that suddenly our voter approval rate went as high as this. And of course, we tried to minimize that last year and still have a good, solid, balanced budget. But I think we feel like if people started looking at that and seeing, say, give cities the opportunity to really raise it that high, even though that may be the right thing, just because you lost all that value, we think some other folks might see that and go, we need to take a look at this.
Yeah, so there's a balance.
And like I said, we'll circle back to this at the very end so that you can have a discussion on what rate you'd like to publish. So looking at our general fund revenues, I went on to compare our revenues from this year, 2027 at 29.9. Last year, we had about $27.8 million in revenues. Our largest revenue category is your property taxes. That increases by $1 million. 750 of that is due to the 2-cent tax rate increase that we are proposing. So without that 2% tax increase, you would not have a very, maybe only about a $250,000 increase in your revenues in property tax without that. Everything else on your revenues is pretty stable. That's one of the things that I've always loved here is that we don't have a lot of volatility. We had a few that dropped. Fire services, just looking at the collections there, dropped a little bit, about 37,000. And then the transfers did go up by 25%, but I did want to note that that also included a one-time contribution to the general fund for closing the TERS fund. The council did that earlier this year, so that brought in roughly about $400,000 into the general fund transfers. So this year we did not use any fund balance, and so they were not needed for any of our one-time expenditures.
And with fire services, if it's contractual, how is there any difference? Is it just paying bills slower, or?
So it's not the fire services with the lake cities. This is for the collections for EMS.
EMS collections, I got you. All right.
Sorry if I.
No, that
said
makes
incorrect.
sense.
Well, there weren't fewer EMS trips, were there?
No, so last year when we did the projections, we were receiving quite a bit of growth, so I actually anticipated that we were gonna have more growth in that than we actually did. So this year I was just, noticed that the trend over the 2 years, because it was a new service and new proposed rates that we had, and so just looking at the historical, I just didn't feel that they would be sustaining at that higher level. And looking at our ad valorem, I wanted to just kind of go back and look to see what the impact of your senior tax freeze actually does to your roll. And so in 2025, we didn't have a senior tax freeze. The certified rolls came in at 8.47%. And so again, no impact on your senior tax freeze. And then we do have those contributions to the tax increment reinvestment zone number 2 and number 3 that was roughly about 48 million. In value, and so overall we had an adjusted assessed valuation of about 7.33. So that was a pretty good growth and was pretty consistent with what we'd had in prior years. Moving into last year, which was the first year of our senior tax freeze, the roll came in at 7.69. When you adjust it for the loss of your tax limitation values, that dropped that growth to 3.48. And then once we did the contributions to those tax increment reinvestment zones, then our overall growth in your AV value from one year to the next was 1.74. Now moving into this year, the roll came in pretty consistent with last year at a growth of 7.32. Moving the tax freeze loss of 171 million, it dropped our adjusted change in tax value to 3%. And so once we only took out the TERS number 2, because the council did terminate TERS 3, then our AV growth was at 2.23%. So really, just a real small growth in our roll. So overall, we're anticipating about a 25% loss from your tax freeze and your deferrals, which is about 968,000. And then again, the termination of the TERS number 3 did return $437,000 back to the general fund. And that was, since we were not paying it directly and then contributing to that fund. Now, I did also want to kind of just show a little bit of historical and kind of looking at some projections on the senior tax freeze. So when you look at the green, those are all values of your seniors before we had the senior tax freeze. So we had some growth. During those years, your average growth in value was about 9.8% annual growth, and your average account increases was about 4.2%. And so when I looked and projected out past 2026, so starting in 2027, I went with a very conservative growth value. So I actually incorporated a 3% growth and left the loss at 25%. Now, after you've got about 2 or 3 years, and we're going to be able to really fine tune where we are with your deferrals and your losses as well. Because one of the things that, not that it's concerning, but you see that we had a loss in value from 25 to 26. So your property values that we lost in 25, your seniors had the amount of taxes they were paying frozen at that rate. Once their values drop, it resets to that lower value. So anytime you have any fluctuation of values going down, then it's resetting them at a lower rate. So that means you're going to have higher loss in the future years. And it is an incremental because you are losing that compounding increases from year to year. So looking at this, I think, over the next few years, the amount of revenue loss could potentially go up to well over $1 million within the next 5-6 years. And your loss is obviously going to continue to increase as well. The other item that's affecting our tax revenues is the tax increment reinvestment zone. And I just wanted to just remind everywhere where we were in that process. We currently have a fund balance of $439,000 from prior years. This year, we're going to contribute $568,000, and that's because a lot of the growth that we had was in the TERS number 2. And this is going to be the first year that Denton County is going to contribute into the tax increment reinvestment zone. And so I reached out to them to get an estimate. Now, we've estimated based on last year's property tax rate, because at the time, they still don't know exactly where their property tax is going to be. So this could fluctuate up or it could fluctuate down. But right now, we've estimated at about $183,000. And then the council approved a reimbursement from the TERS to the EDC, as the EDC did purchase some land, and so they're going to pay the EDC back $212,000 annually over the next 5 years. So we have that expenditure in the fund. So at the end of 2027, we anticipate about $978,000 in the tax increment reinvestment zone that the council can start using to actually do some improvements to infrastructure or projects or so forth within the zone. So this is going to continue to increase quite substantially over the next few years. The interlocal with Denton County begins on January 1st of 26 and expires in December 31st of 2055 with a contribution cap of $24 million. Now, the first few years, they're going to contribute 90%, and then it drops to 80 and 70% in the subsequent years. So I anticipate probably in the next 2-3 years, you're going to have a pretty substantial amount of monies coming into this fund. Looking at our expenditures, the departments requested about $30.8 million initially. We had budget changes. We reduced about $990,000. So we ended up with a proposed budget of $29.8 million. Your largest expenditure is going to your personnel at $22.4 million. So that's about 75% of your budget. Now, I would like to also note that as far as operational, so operations that you have to run your fire department, your police department, maintenance on your streets, your parks, and then also your support, that only makes up about $6.4 million or 21% of your budget. So that's really a small amount when you actually look at all the different businesses and services that the general fund provides. Now, in order to balance the budget, we did make budget reductions of 1.1 million. And so there's some reductions of 481,000 for what we considered non-essential expenditures. As I mentioned previously, we froze 3 positions, and that was 277,000. And then we also budgeted the salaries for police, fire, streets, and parks at 97%. So basically, we know that those departments have vacancies every year, so instead of budgeting it at 100%, we don't budget the full amount, and so we just assume that those vacancies are going to occur. And so that reduced $404,000 out of the budget.
Just a question real quick. I probably should have asked this when you gave Guadalupe the floor, but that 3-point COLA adjustment, is that kind of the standard rate? And what did we do last year? How does that compare with other municipalities?
Yes, it was, last year was a 3%. The one thing that happens is that we have a lot of people that are at the max of the pay range. So what it does is that we also would have a one-time pay that is not ongoing. So compared to other places, we are lagging. We are lagging. However, this is pretty much what was, with the money that was able to do. But you have about, I would say, 40 to 50 employees, so 1/4. They are going to have a lump sum. And that allows for not having an amount that is ongoing. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think when you compare to other cities, it really depends. I've seen some cities do 5. There's a lot of cities this year, because of what happened with appraisals that I've read, aren't doing raises at all. I think Denton has made that pretty public, and I've seen that, like I said, in other places. I think 3% probably falls in right there in that range where cities are doing between 2 and 5. But it really just kind of depends.
Maybe on the conservative end, but we got to retain our people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And with the health insurance increase that some of them are going to feel, we were just trying to offset that the best we could. The 3% for police and fire is the natural progression in their step plan. There were no market adjustments in this budget to move those ranges at all.
So, I was just gonna say, Mr. Campbell, when you and I were looking kind of across Denton County, there were multiple cities that had appraised value reductions much higher than the city of Corinth. And it's kind of odd, some of the areas like Highland Park, where the big homes are, you would actually see 2 and 3% increase in value. But some of the newer areas, was it Frisco,
That was
Prosper?
I think so, yes.
I mean, it's upwards of 7.5%, and some of those cities out there are already at like 65 to 67 cents, so much higher tax rate than Corinth, and so every city is feeling the pinch, whether they are managing through the first 4 years of tax freeze or not. I just feel blessed that we're in a position where we're not seeing those numbers.
Yeah.
Right? And we already have development moving. If we were starting fresh with development with these numbers, it would be batting down the hatches.
209 million came in handy, honestly. of the
Very
new
handy this
value.
year.
Last year, that was about 115, and I recall the comment being made in here that we thought that'd be a little higher, and we all agreed we should catch the next year, and it's happened.
And we have another several years of that, so. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, trying to catch
So
up
one
on.
of the staffing positions that we're eliminating is code compliance, but that was the second one. We will have one, correct?
We have one that's in the budget now that we're trying to hire, that's
That's-
still in the budget, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that was
So
just the
this-
second. I just wanted to.
That was the second one. That's,
Okay.
she has a slide in a minute that will show what we're recommending specific.
And then the enterprise lease program, we gained almost $1 million on sales, but how many years? When did we-
So we started the program in 2017, so that's a few years.
Okay,
Can't think on the top of my head right
no,
now.
that's
I
okay.
have a question about that, just out of curiosity.
I'm like sitting here going, what? I've been dealing with a lot of numbers lately.
Do they, I know that fuel costs are, you know, a pretty big expense. Do they ever have a hybrid option? Just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, they do.
You know, just to, I don't know how much the guys, you know, aren't chasing after people. I think you want gasoline for that.
For your squads.
Chase them down in a Prius. Come on.
You want
The
electric,
gerbils are real.
you want electric for chasing.
Yeah, you do.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well.
A lot better.
Stick you to the back of the seat.
But you want it to be a short chase.
I just didn't know if that was an option through Enterprise.
Study that.
I have one more question. The non-essential targeted reductions, what's considered non-essential?
Well, I'll have that on the
Should have a
next slide.
that'll break that down.
Yeah.
Good question.
So just to kind of sum up this chart, as I mentioned, just because of the budget constraints that we had, it is really a non-growth budget. I mean, we had to cut a lot of expenditures just to balance, but there were some items, and we will go through those during the next budget workshop on the 20th, where the department directors will present some of the things that we increased in the budget. There were some things that just had to be added, you know, either mandates or just cost increase to some agreements. So all in all, we did add $167,000 in the budget, but 89,000 of those are one-time expenditures. So we worked really, really hard to try to just make sure to not just keep adding expenditures to the budget this year. So the other thing is I wanted to just kind of show of our general fund, we have 29.8 million. 55% of that, right at 16.5, is geared towards your public safety. So that pays for your police and your fire. Your, what I consider your core municipal departments, your street operations, your parks operations, that's about 4.5 million collectively. That's about 15.2% of your budget. Then you have your support divisions. So we support all the departments within the city, which is finance, HR, and technology. It was at 4.2 million, or roughly 14.1%. Planning and development, which is planning and building services, is about $1.6 million of the budget. Facilities management is $761,000, and they support just maintaining all of our facilities within the city. And then your administrative functions like city admin, court, communications, that was $2.23 million, or 7.5% of your budget. So now, like the question that Councilmember Henderson mentioned. So when we came to the council in early July, we were looking at about a $1.6 million shortfall. So we ended up about $1.5 million. And so the budget does include a 2% increase in the general fund, as the council kind of gave us some indication that you might be willing to increase the tax rate. That generated $753,000 in additional revenue to offset that shortfall of $1.5 million. So to balance the budget, we did have to cut $758,000 in expenditures. So this first column, which is at 2 cents, of the 2-cent increases that we had that equaled your 758, you have that first row, which is the 3 positions that we froze, which is your multimedia and your code enforcement compliance officer. And those are going to be frozen for 6 months. And then your lieutenant, police lieutenant, for 1 full year at $180,000. And again, as I mentioned previously, all 3 of these positions were frozen in the current budget year as well. The middle section is your contingency funds, and mostly, and so we reduced the city manager contingency fund by $37,500, remove our building repair contingency fund by $20,000, reduce warrant fees by $17,750. And what that means is we're still going to be sending warrants to Flower Mound to be put into the regional database. We're just going to be more intentional and really look at the ones that we're sending to make sure that we can get those collections. So we can do it without really hampering the operations, and Lance is still going to be out, collecting on everything else. And then we did make some changes in our janitorial services about how often and where we clean and so forth. And so that reduced $24,000 out of our, the janitorial contract that we have for all of our facilities. The next category, these are the items that most of them that we considered enhanced services. So you have, I'm gonna jump around a little bit, you have like your promotional items, advertising, Christmas decor, wrapping the trees at Agora. Those are not essential services, so those are items that we cut in the current year that we feel that we could cut next year as well. We also had the special events, where that was cut this year at $125,000. We reduced that again next year at $425,000, and is not part of the core operations. And Caroline and her staff, I think, did an amazing job of still putting on some great events, even with that reduction, and she's done great at getting sponsorships as well. And then the rest is, we eliminate the prep program at $50,000, which it was reduced this year currently as well. And then also reduce the contingency for the city council. It has a $5,000 eliminated that for the year. The two items that kind of, you could say, are operational is we did put in to reduce the transfer from the general fund to the technology fund for future replacement of police and fire radios, $50,000 for police and $75,000 for fire. And we picked this one in particular because this is not gonna hamper this when we go to replace those. Because we had already started putting money aside for this, and then when we received the ARPA money, we went ahead and bought the radios with the ARPA funds. So we are ahead in the amount of money that we are putting away for those radios. So when the time comes that we have to replace them, we're gonna be fine. So if we have to reduce this for 1, 2, or 3 years, it's not gonna cause any problems in that collection. So one thing that the council did mention is that if we, during our workshop earlier, is what would be cut if we increase taxes, 2 cents, 2.5 cents, or 3 cents. So if we move to 2.5 cents, that is the second column. So everything in red, regardless if we increase tax by 2, 2.5, or 3 cents, the items that are in red are gonna have to be eliminated in order to balance the budget. You would have to increase probably a little over 4 cents to offset the full amount that we would need to cut. The top box, if we went to 2.5 cents, we could restore your multimedia position and your building code compliance position for the full year, and we would be able to hire the lieutenant at a half year instead of it being frozen for the full year. If we moved on to 3 cents, we could do everything that I just mentioned, and then we would also restore the contingency funds within that middle section. But again, as I mentioned, everything in red, regardless of how many cents we increase, those would still need to be eliminated in order to reduce the budget. Now, the offside of that is if council does not want to raise taxes, then we would need to go back to the budget and we would need to cut an additional $753,000. And at that point, I believe we would be getting into some of your core functions in order to make up the amount of revenue that we would lose to the increase to the tax rate. Any questions on this?
Those core cuts, if I'm not mistaken, were presented last time we met, right?
Yes, yes.
Because it was through that meeting that
Correct.
council said those items are important items to just be kicking down to next year. And we don't see that it's gonna get better next year or the next. Like, this is a three-year project to get through this. So this is starting with the assumption based off what we had already decided last meeting, which is 2 cents. So we had asked if we can see these 2.5 and 3 cents, that gives council an idea of things that could come back. And is that something that they want to vote for, or are we happy with the 2 cents, right?
Correct, correct, correct. And this would be something for the council to consider when you're making the decision of what tax rate to publish. So if you are to consider it, then we would need to adjust what the proposed tax rate is so that we can publish that
Does
rate.
the 3 cents push us into any of our,
No.
okay.
You have 8 cents, I believe.
Yeah, we just discussed. I was
Yes,
just
sir.
double checking. Okay.
Yes, sir. So, and Scott, you made a good segue into our just financial forecast. And so I always try to present where we are within the proposed year. So we do have a policy target to have our fund balance at 20% of our budgeted expenditures. So as I mentioned previously, we're not using any of our fund balance this year. So we are going to be well above that target at 25.5%. Now, moving into 2028, I factored in, cost of living, progression through your step plan, health insurance costs. We have some increases that we know are coming as far as expenditures are concerned. And I've looked and done a conservative as far as property taxes, assumptions. Moving into 28 and then restoring everything that we've cut, your 758,000 of expenditures that are cut, we would start out next year, we're about $1.1 million short, assuming that there are not any significant increases in AV value. And you can see just looking in 29 and 30, there are going to be some challenges that you mentioned. We're about 2 or 3 years before the growth hits that we're going to be able to take advantage of that. And then again, you just don't know what the legislature is going to do for you next year because it is going to be very heavy in property tax relief as well. So there are several things that will impact the financial forecast. But all in all, I think as far as what we are required to have in our fund balance, we're above the target, and that's where we want to be, especially if we're going to issue debt, because the bond rating agents, they look to see how healthy your fund balance is as well.
And there is a bill proposed as well that talks about not increasing your expenses year to year more than 3%. And so that's, when you have a $1 million hit or a $650,000, whatever it is on health insurance, so you just gotta figure out a way to deal with that, but, that's potentially coming too.
So Leanne, the general fund financial forecast, is that assuming the 2 cents as part of your presentation?
Yes. 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 Okay, so moving into the debt portion, so not going to cover this too much because we've already looked at it a few times, but just wanted to bring up that over the next 5 years, we do have about $85.6 million in infrastructure improvements that need to be made, and a good portion of them are in the general fund and, of course, water, wastewater in the future years. For 2027, we are looking at having a bond sale of about $10.8 million in February, and so well before the legislature makes any changes, so that way we can go ahead and issue that. Now, we will need probably some flexibility in that, and we will come back to council in February, March, because by then we probably will know if there's going to be some limitations, because you may want to combine some of your debt issuance or move some debt up to get ahead of any legislative changes if they're going to be hampering your ability to do so. But again, we will take a look at that in February, March, April of next year and make that determination. As of right now, we are looking at just that $10.8 million. When you look at those projects, again, Glenn has gone over those, I think, in detail at the last meeting. And so we have those, which they do cover some drainage, parks, streets, mostly. So we will do a debt issuance of $10.8 million. And we did have some existing proceeds or savings from some of the projects that we already had, about $1.3 million that we've moved to these projects. And then this budget, there's actually some transfers there of $785,000 so that we can try to minimize how much debt we actually issue. And so as far as your impact and looking at the 5-year forecast for our debt service, for our current tax rate in your debt fund is 14460. So we are proposing a tax rate increase of just under 1 cent at 0.894. So your rate will be 15354, and that will support your debt issuance of $10.8 million. Looking on, if we do, and again, each year, right now, you're only going to be approving the first year of your CIP. And so you will have the ability to change your priorities from 28 to 2030. But if it was funded as presented and assumed a very conservative 3% annual growth, and keep in mind, when we went through that, we've been below 3% the last 2 years, so there is going to be some fluctuation there. Overall, it's about a 6.59 cent tax increase over the next 5 years to your general fund to be able to fund some of those improvements that are needed. But again, as we always do each year, we prioritize those and we look at moving projects around to try to minimize any type of increase to your tax rate.
With the businesses we have coming in, and the sales tax and things that they will bring, will that not help offset some of this? I mean, how many years is it gonna take before we can see an offset?
So your sales tax will only affect your general fund side of the tax rate, so what funds your maintenance and operations. But any growth in buildings and so forth that affect your property tax, as that valuation goes up, then yes, you should still some relief in this fund. Again, I did very conservative at 3%, just because the last 2 years we've been below 3%. But if you start having some of that growth come in pretty heavily, then that growth, the new growth value will come in. And so as that growth goes up, then some of this tax projections will be able to go down.
So the tax rate would not have to increase?
Correct.
It will help.
It would help tremendously.
But a lot of that will go immediately into the, it is what it is on the senior freeze. It lost a lot of value with that, and we just deal with that. So a lot of that's gonna go toward filling that hole. But it certainly will help when that sales tax starts coming in.
So we are August 6th, so we're talking today about the financial overview. I only covered general fund because the general fund is complex enough to go through within an hour. So we will cover the utility fund financials and the storm drainage on September 3rd. We'll also do some public hearings on the 3rd. But at the next council meeting on August 20th, as I mentioned, the directors will come in and they'll present their budgets to the city council. And then on that night, we'll also have the council vote on the published tax rate. So again, that is the highest possible tax rate that you want to consider in September. So just kind of recapping, we will have to put a notice in the newspaper that says what that rate is, and that's why it's called the published tax rate. And just to kind of just sum again, your no new revenue rate was 54290. We have a city manager proposed tax rate of 56603. The two that will allow you whether it triggers an election or not is your de minimis tax rate of 56900, which your press tax rate is well below that. And even if you did increase above that, as long as your rate is below that voter approval tax rate, then that does not trigger any type of election. And that voter approval rate is 64979. So the highest possible tax rate that you can consider is that 64 cents. And so with that, we would just need some direction from the council as to what published tax rate you would like for us to move forward with and present to you on the 20th.
And just to be clear, the 56 cents on the de minimis rate would position us maybe for a petition. Is that not
No,
correct?
as long as you're below the voter approval.
As long as, okay, I want to make sure.
You have to be above the de minimis and above the
Sorry,
voter, yeah.
that's the adjusted voter approval.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So are there any contingencies with regard to appraised value, information coming in, or any costs in the budget that aren't finalized that we would want to make sure we could cover that are above the proposed tax rate that the city manager
Covered
has
everything.
discussed with us tonight?
I don't think there's any additional ones. It would just be whether restoring what.
Some of those cuts.
Some of the cuts that were made.
And a lot of the cuts y'all were concerned about last time, as the mayor said, I think were some of those other transfers. That we said we could only do that for a year or two before, right, man? I think.
Well, there was some deferred maintenance items.
We put those
That's
back.
what I recall, like, that, like, if we're deferring it to a later tax year when we're gonna have even a bigger impact from these or potentially bigger impact on our tax rate and ability to actually fund these costs, let's not defer them. So all that stuff's back in.
That's back in. Like we talked about road maintenance,
Yeah.
one big one, yes, sir.
The 2 cents that the council asked us to look at, that helped us leave those items into the budget.
When we had the TML Section 8 meeting, and there was a person there talking about whatever budget you have next year, you can only go 1% more. Has that started, or is that being proposed?
Being proposed.
Being
So
proposed.
they're back to that,
1.5.
they're back to that rate of 3.5%, can't go more than 3.5%.
Okay.
On
so
your no new revenue rate, they may kick that down to 1.5%. So I think that's what J.J. Roach was referring to that night. So that's what's coming up in this session. Yes, ma'am. And you can't increase total expenditures more than 3%. That's gonna come up too.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? What do you need from us right now?
So I think
You
back
need
to
a tax rate?
what y'all are comfortable with. At the 2 cents on the M&O and the just a smidge less than a penny on your debt rate, that's a 2.8% increase. We feel like we've got a solid budget at that. We've put a lot of that stuff back in, as you asked. I'm confident that's a responsible document. I'm comfortable with that.
So typically, every year when we go through this, for Heath's sake,
Yeah, please.
we'll increase the published rate to an amount that we think, just in case something pops up or just in case council wants to make a move, we don't have to actually set a tax rate at that amount. And so in years prior, especially when we didn't get our AV values from Denton County, we would set that potential maximum tax rate as high as we possibly could. And then when we actually voted on the tax rate, we brought it back down to where we thought that it was. So the question is, are you guys happy with 56603? Do you want to leave some wiggle room in there, knowing that we can get it back down as we make it through discussions? What's your thoughts?
Have we had any negative public feedback from, I mean, I'd rather it give a little cushion, just in case. I mean, I don't see any reason to limit your options. I'm very comfortable in September voting for the tax rate 56603. I just feel like in years past with the appraisal district and the taking, like, setting it there, there's always a chance between now and then there'll be some surprise information. Or they'll come back and say, you've calculated this wrong.
I think we give it more cushion.
Yeah, so, I mean, what's the de minimis rate would be the maximum we could publish, correct?
The voter approval.
You could have,
Yeah,
you could oppose
I don't,
that might.
I don't intend to scare people.
Why don't I go to your house?
I mean, I'm just thinking out loud, like 5.8, you know, below the de minimis, well, that's above the de minimis rate.
Well, 569 would be an additional 3 cents.
Yeah,
Where we're at now.
yes, that would be
Do the
very,
de minimis rate.
that would be very comfortable, I think.
I'm okay with that.
And then we can whittle it out as we make it through our.
I've
budget
seen
meetings.
one post since the budget went out proposing the 2 cents. That's all I've seen.
Leanne, what are you hearing from Denton County as far as timeline?
As far as what?
The timeline to get us our valuations? I know,
No, we've got them.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, yes.
everything, everything's in now.
Yes,
'Cause
everything.
they trickled it,
Yes.
yeah, but we've got everything in now.
So they had sent out an email in July saying it's possible they won't
Yeah.
be certified, and I think
Yeah.
I mentioned that.
Yeah.
But they did get them to us on the 25th.
Okay, good. I've been,
Probably should have.
Yeah, no, they did really well. Getting them out.
good, good.
Okay.
Okay. So any other questions or comments on the rest of the agenda items?
No?
Pretty easy meeting. So what we're gonna do is take a couple minutes and then, so we can use the restroom, then I'll see you back up at the dice.
Brain is debating eating another brownie. I'm really mortified by my back crack. I know.
No, I was impressed.
My
So workshop is adjourned at 6:45.
Oh my gosh, that's scary.
Sit back and hop up over his chair and look at people as they talk and go back under.
Like, something.